Hi, everybody. This is Alyce Lee Stansbury. Welcome to Notes on Nonprofits, the May show. Can't believe we're already at May. Thank you for being here. Sorry for the 3-minute delay. We had a few tech issues as we got ready to roll today, but I'm very glad you're here and glad that we're having today's discussion. Our topic today is strategic planning is not a meeting, it's a mindset. And I know because I talk to nonprofits all the time, how many of them are going through a planning process right now. I also know many of them are looking at their plans upside down and sideways, given the current challenges that nonprofit organizations are facing. So it's a really good time to have this conversation about what do we mean by that, that it's not a meeting, it's a mindset. And I'm very happy that my guest, Jaworski Vance, is here to join me to talk about it. So please help me welcome Jaworski Vance to the show.
Hey, Alyce Lee.
Hey, Jaworski, how you doing?
Man, I'm doing fantastic. Looking forward to this show.
Good. Thank you for being here. I really appreciate it.
Oh, yeah, it's my pleasure.
So, a few greetings. I want to say hello to our friends at Women Wednesdays and thank them for joining today's conversation. Also, remind everybody that we are live and we do this purposely so that if you are watching and would like to make a comment or have a question that you want to ask me or my guests, we really love it. We really love it when you do that. We have quite a few fans of the show that always tell me they watch it afterwards and don't say anything. So we say hello to them. But we encourage everybody, if you want to ask a question or make a comment or say heck yeah or heck no, we definitely want to hear from you. We are streaming live right now on Notes on Nonprofits on Facebook and on LinkedIn. And we will also air the show later on YouTube on the Stansbury Consulting page. So we want to hear from you and we look forward to today's discussion. So, Jaworski, let's start a little bit with you. Tell us about you and your work with Vance Strategies.
Okay, cool. I just recently turned 50 recently, Alyce Lee, and I realized something about me. I'm a little hard to deal with at times because I'm extremely disciplined and I spend a lot of time thinking about planning, business. I'm just really concerned about helping people realize their full purpose and potential, which is why I started the company, Vance Strategies. We do strategic business consulting with the goal of helping organizations reach their missions, improve their bottom line,
Right.
with an emphasis on strategic planning, systems development, and company culture.
That sounds great. Well, and I know from personal experience, you and I have worked on a couple of projects together, particularly strategic planning projects, and I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, it's all about how do we help organizations and nonprofits fulfill their missions and do so in the most effective and powerful way possible. And we also know that these are very challenging times in the nonprofit sector. And
Mhm.
I've been hearing from a lot of nonprofits saying we need a new strategic plan, or we need to update our plan, or our plan just doesn't make sense given the new information and the changes that are happening to our funders and just in our community. So I think it's a really good time to tackle this topic. And I guess I want to start with, because you and I brainstormed together on the topic. Why do you say that? Why do you say strategic planning is not a meeting? It's a mindset. What do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, tying it back to just turning 50, strategic planning is about what you are doing with the organization. Like I think about when you think about organization is an organism. It's comprised of leaders, it's comprised of staff members, it's comprised of clients and members. And the strategic plan, when nonprofits and businesses actually look at it like it's a mindset and they do it well, everybody's impacted, everybody's affected, and you create a synergy that's just like our bodies, right? The mind controls these big old hands you see me waving in the screen,
Waving around.
wave them around, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
but what a lot of us do with strategic planning, we don't look at it as a mindset. We just look at it like it's a piece of paper that we talk about one day, then we put it on the shelf. And
Right.
so you don't get the continuity, you don't get the synergy, you don't get the masterminding that comes from a good, solid understanding that strategic planning is not just a meeting, but a mindset. That's why I
Right.
love the title.
Yep. Well, I agree with you, and I hear what you're saying. And just based on the calls I've been getting lately from organizations looking to update or even adopt a new strategic plan, one of the first questions I end up asking, and this might be a question for people watching today to ask themselves, what do you mean by strategic planning? Because you and I have learned that sometimes what we call strategic planning they might really be thinking of as a 1 day brainstorming session, which is a critically important thing, but it's not necessarily the same thing as a strategic planning process. And I think a lot of organizations might think of strategic planning as kind of an action planning day. What are our priorities and how do we put them in priority order? And what longer conversations do we as a board and a leadership team need to have as part of a planning retreat that helps us get beyond the day to day or the month to month work at the board meeting? We need a full day or a day and a half to really dig into some issues. All of these things are great. I'm not sure they're all necessarily strategic planning, but I think they get referred to. Oh, we need a strategic planning day or a strategic planning retreat. And I love what you're saying about, coming up with a plan and having something on a slide or on a piece of paper is not the same as kind of adopting a mindset that our plan is our roadmap and it's how we're gonna move our organization forward. What are your thoughts about the different ways that people think about strategic planning?
I like how you package that because most organizations do just that. They take a limited amount of time to focus on something that should be extremely comprehensive,
Yeah.
right? So one of the things that I teach my students when we're playing golf is slow equals smooth, smooth equals fast. And the
Mhm.
reason I'm bringing that up now is most organizations are so headlong into the work, right? They're getting the work done, they're pushing their mission, they're just, chomping at the bit to make a difference in our community, but they're
Right.
working so hard, they need to slow down completely, to stop for a little while with some of the things that they're doing and
Yeah.
prioritize the importance of a long-term strategic plan. See, strategic planning, there's only two things that distinguish the difference between planning processes, and that's length of time and focus, right?
Okay.
So the focus for a strategic plan, it's comprehensive. Like
Yes.
we're looking at a universe of an organization. We're looking at the external factors, the internal factors, the stakeholders, the
Hmm.
donors, the members. We're looking at all of those things. And that can't be done in one day. And then we're looking at it over a 3 to 5 year period. Now, if you can squeeze that into one day, mm, it's just really difficult to do that.
Yes.
I would
Yes.
almost say impossible, depending
Yeah.
on the size of the organization.
Right. Well, and you just said something that I want to. First of all, I love slow leads to smooth and smooth leads to fast. I want to lift up something else that you said, which is about the internal and external work that I think nonprofits need to do as part of a robust strategic planning process, which is
Yes.
why it's more than a meeting, and it's more than a meeting, right? Because sitting in a room and having a conversation with the board about the issues, the challenges, the opportunities, a SWOT, all of those things, without taking into account what's happening outside your organization, what your stakeholders are saying, what your funders are saying, what similar organizations are doing with a like mission in your community and other communities. Could you talk a little bit about your thoughts about that and why that really becomes a part of the mindset about strategic planning, which is it's not just an internal conversation, it's an external engagement.
Of course. And that's what I was saying earlier, and I'm glad you brought that up. I do think that organizations kind of focus internally on what they have going on with the staff, maybe even with their members or clients and
Hmm.
the board. But in order to understand the impacts that your mission is having, you need to get information from as many people in your universe is possible,
Right.
whether they are donors, whether they are community stakeholders, community partners. They can even be some peripheral businesses that are impacted by what you do and also impact what you do as an organization. And that's where strategic planning moves from just being a document that we place on the shelf or a meeting that we have one day into
Right.
being a comprehensive mindset. Now, here's why that's important, in my opinion, because
Okay.
I love this kind of stuff.
I know
The,
you do.
yeah, the domino effect that happens when something in your universe changes, right?
Right.
Great example. All of us are dealing with it right now. I went to the gas pump. The gas was my gas. I used to put premium in my car. I had to change. I had to drop it down to, just plus. I'm
Yeah.
thinking about going to regular. But anyway,
Right.
the gas
Right.
prices have it's changed everything. So we've got utility bills that are going up, we've got costs of anyway. But if you got a strategic plan in place that helps you understand how economic changes like that impact your organization, you can adjust. If you
Right.
don't have those plans in place,
It's
it's a
harder
little
to
harder
adjust.
to a
Yeah.
little harder to adjust.
Harder to adjust. I think that's a great point. I think that's a great point. And I think you've touched on something that I kind of put into the myth or misconception category about strategic planning, which is that it can be a one day wonder. It can be a one day event,
Mm.
which I think strategic planning at its best is a much more comprehensive process than that. But are there other, in your experience, wildly held beliefs, about strategic planning that you think are missed or that you just really disagree with that we kind of need to
Yeah,
get out of the way before we
I
keep
think the
talking?
one I'm sorry, what'd you say, honestly?
I
I
said, let's
missed it.
talk about, let's get that out of the way before we kind of dig into this a little deeper about what some of these widely held beliefs or misconceptions really are.
Yeah, I mean, to tag along with your disdain, because I know you have disdain for that 1 day strategic planning session, because that's just not possible. One of the myths that I actually read about this recently in the Harvard Business Review, and I totally agree with it, and that is that strategic planning is about just being productive. It's about just getting things done. Well, that's not the strongest essence of the planning process.
Right.
The most important thing that you want to do in strategic planning, and this is why knowing how everybody's perspectives interact, how all of our priorities overlap, the most
Hmm.
important thing is figuring out highest and best use of
Yes.
your resources within your universe. That's it.
Right.
And you can't determine highest and best use or efficiency, which is why I love to play golf, which is why I tell people slower is smoother, smoother is fast. And we don't want to take the time out to move slower, right? To knock that ball out the park because we understand our clients. We understand. And look, and then not only just we understand them, they have an understanding of what we've got going on
Right.
because we've asked them the question, hey, look, how do you feel about what we're doing over here with whatever service you're
Right.
providing?
Two-way
And
street.
so it's a two-way street. It
Two-way street.
creates
Yeah.
this, it creates what we're talking about, not just a document, but a mindset, and a mindset that's not just shared
Hmm.
internally, but a mindset that's shared throughout the universe. So
Hmm.
my going back to answering your question, productivity is not the goal. The goal is highest and best productivity
Right.
with the resources you have available within your universe.
Yeah.
You can't do that in 1 day, not
Right.
unless you have a really small universe.
Right. I agree with you on that. And I think the 1 day retreat, the 1 day conversation, the 1 day action planning, I think those are great. And I think they
Mm-hmm.
definitely have a role in the board and the staff's decision making and just overall governance of the organization. It kind of goes back to what you're saying, slowing down long enough to have an extended conversation about a critical issue where sometimes staff is educating board members, sometimes board members are educating staff, sometimes a really complex issue needs extra time, more than a 90-minute board meeting can provide, to really unpack the nuances. So I don't want to discount the 1 day session because I think it's an important tool in the toolbox. I'm just
Mhm.
not convinced and don't really see it as a strategic planning process. I think it's a tool in that process, but it's not strategic planning in and of itself, at least in my experience. Do you think that people, just thinking about leaders that are busy, you just made the point, they're busy, they're stressed, do they just underestimate maybe how hard or how complex strategic planning really is? What are your thoughts about
Mm,
that?
well, I have a very serious thought about that, and I was wondering whether I was going to say it, but I'm going to say it. I
Okay.
don't think that people on boards for nonprofits take their jobs seriously enough.
Yeah.
First off, I think that we have people who are positioned on our nonprofit boards who don't understand the gravity, the magnitude, the significance of their leadership and their visionary responsibility to the organization.
Right.
So, to answer your question more directly, if you're sitting on the board with that perspective, that attitude, you're not going to understand how difficult strategic planning is. You're
Hmm.
not going to be willing to invest the time, energy, resources that it takes to come up with a viable plan. Now, on the flip side, I do believe that we have experienced board members who are fully engaged in the process and they know how hard strategic planning is.
Yes.
And they're sitting on boards right now, extremely frustrated because they don't have other people around them to
With the same.
understand
Yeah.
with the same mentality. They don't understand the
Hmm.
gravitas of, hey, look, we got to get in this room, we got to slow down, okay, smooth this thing out so that we can move faster together. And so it's like a two-part answer to your question. I
Yeah.
think that the people that really are
Appreciate it.
invested in these nonprofits, they understand how hard it is. I
Yes.
don't think it's a misconception that strategic planning is hard. It's hard. It's difficult. That's why nobody wants to do it. That's why.
Right. It is
That's
hard.
why. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's why
And it,
we want to do the 1 day wonders. Hey, look, I'm gonna
yeah.
go in here, say I
Yes.
sat down and chopped it up with, this high profile attorney, this doctor, this lawyer, whatever,
Yeah.
and came up with a plan for this organization that's dealing with hunger or domestic violence or things in our community that are extremely important to us. And guess what? That should not be done in 1 day.
Yes. It really requires a bigger time commitment, and that's where I think the challenge is, right? Because everybody's busy. The work being done by the staff and implemented at the community level is intense and difficult. So they've got to put that down long enough to put their thoughts and their mindset on where do we want to be 3 years from now, 5 years from now? How do we position ourselves? How do we respond to what's happening in our ecosystem.
Mm-hmm.
And then I agree with you too that I know wonderful people serving on boards that are totally invested in their role and their responsibility. They take it seriously. They're ready to roll their sleeves up. They know what they signed up for, and others do not. So I do think there's an incumbent situation on behalf of nonprofits when they're going out and recruiting board members, that they're talking to them about one of the things that we're going to come to you for is to partner with us to develop our strategic plan and help us think and see beyond where we are right now. And I don't know how often that conversation is taking place at the point that you're kind of, winking at somebody saying, hey, we'd love, would you be interested in serving on our board? We nonprofits, I've done it myself. We're trying to kind of put ourselves in the best possible light so they'll be interested in putting in the time and effort with our organization,
Mm-hmm.
and talking about strategic planning might be a turnoff to those early conversations, don't you think?
Of course. But what about this? What about when strategic planning becomes a natural part of an organization's diet,
Right.
right? Where board agendas are built off of the plan, you
Yes.
know, the one day wonders that you talked about are actually looks to refresh the plan, right? And then when they go through the planning process, it's a learning experience. The organization actually uses it to train their new board members on what they do,
Right.
how they do business, and give them an opportunity to provide some feedback. You know this, every time we do a strategic planning session, it always ends up being a combination of visionary brainstorming, training, and development.
Yeah.
That's just an inherent part of the process. Depending on where you are as
Hmm.
far as your seniority, tenure, maturation as a board member, if you wanted to more advanced, you remember Nancy? Nancy said, I like a little friction in the strategic planning discussion.
Right.
A little friction builds traction, and traction causes movement, you know. But you could tell she was a senior member that had been doing, you know, strategic planning for years. But
Right.
somebody else that's fresh out of college may not understand that same, they may not have that same understanding as she did, but this will be an opportunity for them to learn it because of the
Right.
process.
Well, and I think too, in fairness to board members who have served on a variety of boards and strategic planning in those organizations, what it was called strategic planning, but it really was action planning or prioritizing or retreat and team building. Again, all important functions and things that need to be happening, but they all kind of got couched as strategic planning. So then they roll into the
Mhm.
next board, and then that board is like, oh no, strategic planning is a robust process, and it's not this document, it's not this one meeting, it's the mindset and it's how we approach everything we do. So there's a learning curve there, I think, and oftentimes board members have not experienced that, and then they join a board that really embraces that our plan is our roadmap, and it informs all of our board agendas. It's part of our DNA. It's how we do
Mhm.
business, as opposed to it's a separate thing over here that we look at every now and then and kind of see how we're doing. So I think I've seen that happen many times, and I know you have as well. If you're just joining us, I just want to say hello and welcome to Notes on Nonprofits. My guest today is Jaworski Vance with Vance Strategies. We are talking about strategic planning and how it is way more than a meeting. It's really a mindset. And we want to do a little myth busting and just dig into really what people may think about strategic planning, what we've seen work in strategic planning that
Yeah.
really changes, I think, the trajectory of what an organization can do once they have a plan in place. So, if you have questions or comments, please drop them right now. Just type away in the comments and say hello or share your thoughts and ask any questions that you might have. Um, we've been talking a little bit about the current environment, the current challenges that I think the nonprofit sector is facing, depending on the type of mission of the organization. Their mission may be under attack. They may have lost uh, federal funding. We're seeing big changes in state funding. It's just a very complex process right now. Um, what would you say to boards that and executive directors that may find themselves in that position right now where they're facing all these challenges and they don't have a strategic plan?
Get one ASAP. I mean, it's critical. Um, with the way the environment is changing so rapidly, with the way the environment has changed from the last 5 years and probably will continue to change, a strategic plan is mandatory. You know, we've got to have leaders who are ready to uh, shift focus when things change. And the best way to do that is to have a good solid plan in place that helps you to make those difficult decisions.
Right.
One
Right.
thing I think nonprofits, and that's why I said get one. One thing I think nonprofits, um, well, I wouldn't say discount, but need to focus on heavily is the contingency. You know,
Mhm.
we've got to be ready for this new thing, whatever this new thing is,
Uh-huh.
right? And the only way you can do that is if you have as much understanding of your universe right here, right now. So that
Yeah.
if something comes into that universe, you know how to make the adjustment up or make the
Mhm.
adjustment down.
Mhm.
And then
Mhm.
here's the thing, know how to make the best adjustment. And a strong strategic planning process has already equipped the rest of your team to be successful in helping you make that adjustment.
Right.
So let me just say this and tag it to the 1 day wonder, right? If you do a 1 day wonder and it's a board meeting only, you might have a few people from the executive team there as well. Those are all the people that know what you have going on. And even if you do come back and share that information with your staff and stakeholders versus a really robust strategic plan that keeps
Mhm.
them involved from the beginning, it's a
Mhm.
lot easier for them to adjust with you because they're informed. They've developed this, they've helped contribute to this plan that you have. So for the
Yes.
ones who don't have one, they need to get one.
Yes. Well, you've hit on something that I think is a big part of the mindset rather than the meeting, which is building consensus, and getting everybody on the board, engaged and in touch with, aware of, and fully informed and fully vested in what's in the plan. And
Yes.
we know from experience that coming up with new ideas, anticipating even those contingencies, um, is a lot easier than building consensus. Coming up with 1,000 great ideas or 100 great ideas and then narrowing them down to what are the highest and best and most important things that we need to be doing as an organization at this time, in this environment, with these opportunities and this board in our community. And that's, I think, one of the hardest parts is what gets left on the cutting room floor. What's
Mhm.
been your experience with that?
I think that's a great point as far as building consensus, especially around what's the most important priority. I think over the course of our strategic planning years, the one thing that has stood out to me most is it's not just what are we going to do, it's what are we going to stop doing,
Yes.
right? Especially in nonprofits, right?
Right.
Like we've been doing stuff for years. We do it out of tradition. And again, I just turned 50. I'm about through all these traditions. I'm traditioned out. I don't want no more turkey for Thanksgiving. Give me some salmon, bourbon glazed salmon from anyway. So, but you understand what I'm saying, right? Like, and
Yes.
then the thing is, the traditions, we're not in a traditional time
Yes.
anymore.
It's a very fluid, I think, uh, process and a very fluid, fluid world. That sounds kind of trite, but kind of goes back to what you were saying about contingencies. I think organizations that go through the planning process and come out with that roadmap, what they also build into that is that flexibility, that
Yes.
nimbleness, because we've thought about what these contingencies might be. We've thought about
Yes.
potential threats. We've thought about opportunities. And of course, sometimes those threats and opportunities come along that you didn't anticipate or couldn't have anticipated. But when strategic planning is your mindset rather than just a written document, it builds in that flexibility so that you can move
Hmm.
and adjust. And I think to your point, apply the stop, start, continue approach to some of the decision making. What do we need to stop doing? What are we, in light of this new bit of information, in light of this new contingency, in light of this heightened threat? What do we need to stop? What do we need to start? What do we need to
Hmm.
continue? I mean, that's a pretty simple formula, but it can be a very helpful tool.
Yeah. We still got organizations that are leaning on customary practices
Yes.
that happened prior to COVID.
Mm-hmm.
And when COVID happened, everything changed for nonprofits. It's just
Yeah.
like now everybody's doing stuff live, and there's just a need to change the way we do business in a way that elevates, leverages resources to fulfill your mission. And if
Hmm.
nonprofits aren't doing that in a very strategic way, especially with the way, like you were saying, how fluid the world is now. I remember when globalization was first big thing, like back in 1999. They were talking about how the world is just becoming so interconnected. Well, guess what? 27 years later,
Right. Right.
this thing is like
Right.
a wave in the ocean. Good luck trying to catch that when it's gone. And if we're
Yes.
not prepared with some foundational strategic planning that everybody understands, it makes it a little harder to adjust.
Yes. So for folks that are listening to this and thinking, oh my gosh, we don't have the plan that we need, or maybe our plan is okay, but it might need something else, or we have been thinking about strategic planning as a meeting, as a document and not a mindset. Are there, are there warning signs maybe that an organization could kind of think of as, okay, if we start to see these things, that's a cue that we need to revisit our plan or update our plan or stop and slow down long enough to consider how this issue affects our work and our mission. Any thoughts on that, about warning signs that, the dashboard, the lights going off,
Hmm.
telling you need to slow down?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, and this is probably the biggest tell-all benchmark alert, is if your strategic plan is not on your board's agenda at least quarterly,
Right.
it's time to pump the brakes and
Hmm.
reevaluate.
Right.
Because otherwise, what are you talking about? What are we talking about here? We talking about the latest and greatest thing that came up. We're putting out fires. I mean,
Yes.
because that's one of the challenges with nonprofits. We're already dealing with mostly volunteer organizations. A lot of times, we're dealing with limited resources, so sometimes we have to put out fires. But
Mm.
the best way to manage these fires is to have a prescribed burn and a strategic plan that we visit, you know, at
Yes.
least quarterly. And if
Hmm.
that's a part of the board's agenda, and if
Right.
it's not an agenda item, then
Yes. I think that's a
that's
great
an alert.
one. I'm going to lift that up. I think that's a great one. I think a great warning sign is that if if the strategic plan is not relevant, if it's really not part of the board's conversation, if it's not underpinning and helping to guide
Hmm.
the board's agenda when it meets, then my guess would be, without knowing any more than that, my guess would be that board meetings are being spent on operational issues rather than strategic goals. Now, there are times you need the board selling tickets to the event. You need the board engaged in an advocacy issue around funding at the local level. There are things that are going to come up that are about the here and the now. And board members play a critical role: donor relations, donor stewardship, advocacy, all those things. Uh, but I'm going to throw out another warning sign. If 80% of the board's agenda is all about operational issues and only 20% or less or none is on strategic issues, I think that's a warning sign that the plan is really no longer guiding your work. That percentage, I'd love to see that switch, right?
Hmm.
Maybe more 70-30, like 70% of our time on our strategic, big, hairy, audacious goals, and 30% on what's happening right now that we need to know and need to respond to. What are your thoughts about that? 70, maybe 70-30.
Mm, 80/20.
You like 80/20 better? Okay.
80% strategic, 20% operational. And then here's the other part too. Like the 20% operational, I think should just be reporting. Like we should just that 20%, we should just be reporting on agreed upon KPIs, key performance indicators,
Hmm.
or outcome measures that we have identified in the strategic plan, and that's it. So
Yeah.
that we can determine, you know, and we talked about this. You can't manage what you don't measure. You can't measure what you don't track, right? But we don't want to be managing all of the operational stuff. That's for the staff to do. And
Yes.
we've given the staff ample opportunity to provide feedback in the strategic planning process. So
Hmm.
at the board meetings, no offense to the staff, we only want to listen to a 20% update about what we all agreed on in this robust strategic planning process. So in these quarterly meetings, I would like 80%. I think the board should be talking about the larger strategy and visions
Yeah.
80% of the time instead of spending a lot of time talking about daily operational things.
As I listen to you talk about this, and again, folks, if you've got a comment or a question, please drop it in the comments. I think maybe one of the challenges, like one of the things that happens, is that the executive director or CEO is running the day to day, right? And right now they are running ragged. It is a very difficult time to be a nonprofit leader. And so my utmost respect goes to people serving in that role. So they're on the hamster wheel of running the day to day. So they don't necessarily, are ready or able to slow down long enough to kind of, okay, where are we in relationship to the strategic plan? In the meantime, I think there's probably some boards that are thinking, well, our executive director will bring this to our attention. And maybe the executive director is thinking, well, this is the board's strategic plan.
Mm-hmm.
So they need to be leading this conversation or leading this effort. And so maybe both parties are waiting for the other one to raise the question or ask the question. Or do you find that? I mean, what's been your experience with that? Like maybe they don't know, maybe one of the challenges and nobody knows whose job is what and who needs to raise the issue or ask the question.
Yeah, I mean, that's standard practice. We see that a lot because boards aren't necessarily clear on their roles, and sometimes they shirk their responsibilities to the executive directors who are already overwhelmed and have way too much work to do. And
Yes.
we have, like we said earlier, sometimes we have board members who are not clear on the gravity of their position. And
Mhm.
so, in my experience, we go ahead and try to nip that in the bud early in the strategic planning process to help clearly define, hey, look, this is the board's role, this is the staff's role. But here's another key ingredient, and we talked about this earlier in the presentation, allowing the board and the staff both to be involved in the strategic planning process so there's no confusion about managing expectations, right?
Yes.
Like you touched on something that was very powerful in that, okay, hey, yeah, the board might be hustling tickets. They might actually be for the latest fundraiser to bring some money, right? They
Right.
might be involved in some daily things. But guess what they do when they do that? They take their board hat off, right? They become a board staff person, but we don't want that to be standard practice. But they also only do that because, hey, look, we've agreed that this is the way we need to do this fundraising event as
Hmm.
a part of the larger strategic plan,
Yes.
right? What I've seen is that sometimes board members are so involved in the day to day, they forget to put their board member hat back on. And
Yes.
then now we are overstepping our leadership role,
Right.
visionary leadership, fiduciary responsibility, and governance activities.
Yes.
That's where you're really supposed to be focusing the bulk of your attention. But that doesn't mean
Hmm.
as a board member you don't get your hands dirty. You know, I work in construction too. Like sometimes I like to get out there and get my hands dirty with the guys so that they can see that I empathize with them and I believe in what they're doing and I'm okay with getting my hands dirty. However, when I get back to these keys, It's
Right.
visionary. It's
Right.
visionary. When we get on the
Strategic
phone,
planning.
yeah, it's
Right.
another level of.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if we'll have any board members watching this. I hope we do, either live or later. We have a lot of people that watch this later. So if you're on a board, we want to be encouraging. We want to say to you that this is a big part, a big responsibility. Being on a board is a big responsibility. Lifting up and advancing and supporting and engaging with the strategic plan is also a really important board role. So I guess my advice and my thoughts would be, don't wait for somebody else to bring it up. If you're in an organization that maybe the trolley's gotten off the track, or the strategic plan has gotten a little dusty, or you find yourselves really in the operations when you come together as a board, then be the one that says, you know what, I think we're having a good conversation, but this is really not the role. This is not the conversation we should be having at the board table. I think we've lost track of our plan, and we're not applying our priorities to our agenda and kind of get back to that mindset. Because it's easy, I think, for that to slip, and for that, getting kind of mired in the day to day. It's easy for that to happen. And even though there may be times that the board has to get their hands, in the work, so to speak, I'm a big believer that if the board's not looking at the strategic vision, then nobody is, because your staff's job is running the day-to-day operations. And so that's their first priority. And so the board's got to really be thinking about, okay, what is this going to mean a year from now, 2 years, 3 years from now, 5 years from now? And, I want to go back to something that we were talking about. You used the word friction. And I think this is one of the, I don't know that it's a challenge in strategic planning, but I do see a lot of boards where they come together and everyone's very politely discussing something, and differences of opinion are, I wouldn't say they're discouraged, but they just maybe just don't happen. If people see it a different way, they just don't speak up, because we're all here to do good work for this great organization. And, I don't want to argue with somebody. I don't want this to blow up. And so they avoid friction. And you were saying earlier, and I know we've seen this in our work, that friction can be a good thing. Could you talk a little bit more about that? Like, in what way is that friction, that seeing it differently, how does that strengthen the process? How does that improve decision making in your experience?
I love a little friction.
I know you do.
Yeah, I love a little friction.
Yeah, I know you
Because
do.
I mean, that's fair. That's the whole point of having a diverse board of perspectives and leadership, where
Mm-hmm.
you can do, like you said, I mean, as iron sharpens iron, so does one man sharpen the countenance of a friend, right? This is how we all become better at what we do,
Mm-hmm.
because we have differences of opinions that
Right.
we can come to the table and talk about, and hash out that one thing between the two of us, that we, or the three of us, or four of us, or 10 of us, 20 of us, that we have decided that we can agree on, with all of these different perspectives.
Yeah.
How powerful is that, right?
Yes. Really
And
powerful.
then and that's the thing too, because now, to Nancy's point, Nancy said friction builds traction. Traction generates movement. Movement leads to speed, right? And one of the ways these organizations move forward quickly is because they had that friction, all this rubbing together. They come
Mm-hmm.
out with this priority that they agree on, and now we're moving together. Can two walk lest they agree? Right now they're moving together,
Yeah.
even knowing, hey, look, I may have had to give up something. I may have had to give up something. Okay, but we agreed on this, and we're all on the same page.
Mm-hmm.
I don't like going to board meetings where everybody's just going along to get along, because
All in favor? Aye. Yes, they go along to get along. Well, I do. I hear what you're saying, and I want to lift that up, because I think when a board and a leadership team, board and the executive director, CEO, when they embrace a little friction, when they embrace a
Yes.
difference of opinions and handle that on maybe not a strategic issue, but just a decision that that a board makes routinely. There's a difference of opinion. They're building that muscle. They're building that skill
I
set
like
and
that.
that ability to reach a consensus when they've considered multiple options and everyone didn't enter the conversation in 100% agreement. So when that's happening routinely as part of the board's business, then when it comes up in the strategic planning process, that muscle has been worked already.
Yes, I love
And
that,
then
Alyce.
right, and then it's not I think as formidable or as scary or as
Mhm.
intimidating as it can be when everybody's like, oh my gosh, this whole thing just blew up and everybody's disagreeing and mayhem has ensued. When the board is having those conversations and working that muscle, then it's just a healthy part of the process in the planning, in strategic planning, rather than a brouhaha.
Mhm. Agreed.
So
I
I
think it's
hope
I
that'll be
think it's
helpful
like,
to people listening to this. Yeah.
yeah, I think to your point, I think there are three things that happens when that muscle develops. You develop trust, you develop rapport, and you develop respect for your fellow board members,
Right.
right? And when you can get those three things actively moving around a board discussion, right?
Mm-hmm.
Hey, look, I may not agree with you, but I respect your opinion.
Your
I
opinion.
may not agree with you, that, and that's what you need to operate at the highest and best for the organization.
Yes. And really, really operate at the highest, really be what I refer to as a high performing board. I think a lot of what we're talking about in regards to strategic planning are also things that I would say are the characteristics of a high performing board. That you look at
Mhm.
things from multiple perspectives, that you don't have 100% agreement every time on every topic. I think about how hard boards work and leaders, staff leaders work to bring to recruit a diverse board, to bring people of different generations and different perspectives and professional expertise and all of that. You work really hard to do that. And as a result, you get, I think, a more robust decision making process because you've got such diversity in your experience around the board table. So to
Yes.
me, that would be a good sign that you're building that muscle. Are there any? I wanted to spend just a few minutes talking about resources and tools. Are there anything that in the work that you've done that you think would help a nonprofit that really does want a robust strategic planning process or wants to move it from more of meeting the meeting to a mindset? Any suggestions you have around that?
I mean, there are lots of tools that they can use as far as the planning process. I think about includes survey,
Hmm.
which is ask a lot of questions,
Right.
to everybody involved. Use the results of that survey to plan,
Hmm.
right? And
Right.
then act, survey, plan, act, review, repeat, right? That's the
Hmm.
process. But here's the challenge: that survey needs to be as independent and objective as possible.
Hmm.
And like we've said, sometimes, a lot of times in organizations, there's some underlying friction that really won't allow the type of information to come out of a conversation that needs to be said. I mean, like if you're a staff member and your ED is just, going to play golf every Thursday and Friday, and you,
I
I
doubt
don't
that's
know any
happening
ED.
right now,
Yeah,
but
I don't know
you're
any
right.
EDs like that, but you know what I'm saying.
No.
That staff member is probably not going to be inclined to roll their boss under the bus. But here's my point: to back to the surveys, focus groups, white papers. Uh, get an independent and objective facilitator to help
Hmm.
you initiate that
Yeah, I
process.
think that's a big
That
help.
can, yeah, independent and objective, and somebody that can maintain and enormous amount of confidentiality to create the kind of environment where you can develop trust, rapport, and respect
Mm-hmm.
that gathers all of these perspectives to help
Mm-hmm.
your organization be great.
Yes.
Because it's going to be difficult to get that quality of information with the current makeup of the organization.
Yes. I think that's a great list. I really do. Surveys, focus groups, use of a third party facilitator. I want to throw another one into the mix, and that's looking at industry trends. So we tend, people outside the sector say, oh, the nonprofit sector. But if you're in education or you're in historic preservation or you're an environmental organization or um, you're a cultural organization, your industry and the issues impacting your mission, your stakeholders, your community are very different. And so, if you are a part of a local organization, a state or a national organization that publishes kind of the state of the state, here's what's happening in the world of orchestras, here's what's happening in the world of land conservation, those kinds of reports and updates can be really, really helpful. They can help a board, I think, kind of get the big picture of what's happening related to the mission so that then they can kind of bring it back, bring it all the way down to, okay, how does this impact what we're doing at the community level? So knowing those industry trends that often come from those state and national reports. So I want to throw that into the mix as another great resource, which is another reason why strategic planning isn't a meeting. It's kind of a little research project where you're
Mm-hmm.
gathering all this information and then synthesizing it in a way to say, okay, based on what's happening at the national level in um, K through 12 education or what's happening in our state around this issue, how does that inform our decision making about what our priorities should be or what our stakeholders and our beneficiaries may need from us as an organization in the coming years. So just throwing that out.
Mm-hmm.
Any piece of advice as we wrap up? We've got about 5 minutes left. What would be your one piece of advice? Let's start with for organizations that are going to listen to this that don't have a strategic plan and want to adopt one. What would you say?
The best advice I would say is to get one as soon as possible, and then get a third party facilitator who's experienced in pulling information out of stakeholders. One thing that I love doing with organizations is a market analysis that does just what you mentioned,
Right.
that looks at not just what are you doing internally, not just what's your position here locally in the community, but what's
Mm-hmm.
happening in the world.
Right. Right.
What's going on in this world? What's
Yes.
going on right now that's impacting dogs and cats and fatherless kids and hungry people. I mean, what's happening? What's going on? So that you can make a prudent decision about what you need to do next.
Yes.
And sometimes you can't. Sometimes you may not have that internally to get that work done. Uh, but one of the biggest reasons I think a third party facilitator is necessary when starting a strategic planning process. Two reasons. One, the education, development, and training. And two, the confidentiality and objectivity,
Right. Right. Right.
right? I think those two things in conjunction can
Really.
help really shift the trajectory of a
Mm-hmm.
nonprofit's experience, from being what they can do internally. I mean, it's like I tell people all the time, when you talk, you're either working on the business or working in the business. And most people are working in the business so much that they don't get
Yeah.
a chance to work on the business,
Yes.
And so,
I can relate to that.
yeah,
And I
when
know
you try,
nonprofits, it's a good point that nonprofits can have that same experience. That's what I meant by the hamster wheel. They're so busy doing the work that they
so busy doing the work.
haven't been able to slow down long enough to put that plan together. Let me throw out one other thing that you just made me think of. No matter where you are in your planning process or where you are in your plan, This is May. Your fiscal year may be ending in another month. It may be ending the end of September or all the way through to the calendar year. One advice or tip I would share is to stay in touch with your stakeholders. That might be your funders, that might be your collaborators, that might be, it's going to be different depending on the mission. But if you're in regular communication, email, calls, visits with whoever the stakeholders are in your mission and in your work, I think you're going to be more informed about those external issues and better able to bring that back to the board and kind of keep your fingers on the pulse of what's happening as the board is making those decisions. So that would be my suggestion. So I need to wrap it up. Jaworski, I want to thank you for being here today. I knew we would have no trouble talking for an hour about strategic planning, which I agree. It's not just a meeting. It's way more than a meeting. It's definitely a mindset. So thank you for that. I really appreciate it. Really appreciate you being here. And I want to say that our next show will be Tuesday, June 9th. We're always the second Tuesday of the month at 12 Eastern. And my guest will be Rebecca White. And Rebecca is awesome. She is a consultant with the Content Cove. And what she specializes in is succession planning for nonprofits, working with boards on that process, and then how to onboard and welcome a new executive director so they get up to speed as quickly as possible and stay in the job and stay in the sector. So this is a big issue. This is a big issue that we're losing people to other work and other jobs. And so Rebecca's doing some great work around this. And I want to talk about, what new executive directors need to be successful. She's doing a lot of great work around that. So if that applies to you or a colleague, please send them this information and plan to join us on June 9th at 12 o'clock. And until then, thanks, Jaworski. I appreciate you so much. And thanks, everybody, for joining us today for Notes on Nonprofits. We'll see you next month.